Hello and welcome to week 3 of campCODE. This week we're going to be talking about functions. Functions are used to repeat code, not unlike the loops we learned about last week, but unlike loops which repeat the same thing over and over again in a loop after each other, functions are able to be performed at any time throughout your project. So functions are actually used to perform special or specific tasks. And you do this by first coding for the task that you want to do, and then you'd be packaging it up in a nice named function. And then at the end, you'll be outputting all of your code to run all of the actions that you coded for. So for example, I have a chocolate chip cookie recipe, and we're going to call this my cookie function. So if I want to run my cookie function and I want to eat a freshly baked batch of chocolate chip cookies right now, I would have to first call my function, so I'd have to find my recipe. 2, I would have to run my code, so I'd have to follow all the directions in my recipe. And lastly, I would have to output my code. So the output in this case would be a whole batch of chocolate chip cookies. So that is a function, and we're going to be doing a bit of cooking in our project today too about functions because we're going to be making scrambled eggs. So in our animation today, we're also going to be a bit more hands-on and add a little bit of interactive elements to it as well. So let's get started by going to Scratch. You'll see today that I'm in the top right corner because the code for these can get a bit long and I don't want to get in the way of the coding area. So first I'm going to sign in, and then I'm going to click on the Create button to get our project up and running. First I'm going to name our project Scratch Lesson 3. And then I'm going to get rid of our Sprite, Scratch the cat over here, so we can have a nice clean slate to work with. Alright, so first I'm going to set up our stage. So on the bottom right, I'm going to choose a backdrop for our scrambled eggs for today. And I want to make an indoor backdrop, preferably in a kitchen, but since we don't have any kitchens available in the Scratch library, the next closest thing would be this refrigerator. So I'm going to use this refrigerator as a backdrop. Next, I'm going to have to add all of the sprites that I'm going to animate. So what do I need to make scrambled eggs? First, I'm going to need eggs. Second, maybe a splash of milk. And lastly, I'm going to need a mixing bowl to mix it all in. So I'm going to go to my Sprite area and choose a sprite. And hopefully I'll find all of the sprites I need in the food category at top here. And you'll see that we have the egg on the left, the milk down here, and then the bowl at the very top. So I'm going to grab our egg first. Next, I'm going to go into food again and grab our milk. And lastly, I'm going to go back in one more time to grab our bowl. And I'm going to put these where I want them to start. So I'm going to drag this bowl to this area front and center down here. I'm going to move our carton of milk to the refrigerator door where there's already another carton in there. And lastly, I'm going to move my egg to the top left where there's a carton of eggs. But you'll also notice that this egg is very large for this carton of eggs, and this bowl is very small to make or mix our scrambled egg mixture in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by resizing some of my sprites. So I'm going to click on the egg sprite, and I'm going to change this to half the size, so 50%. There we go. Next, I'm going to click on the bowl sprite, and I'm going to double the size of this bowl, so 200% in the size area. And the milk, I'm going to keep the size that it already is. So next, I'm going to start actually coding for my sprites. So we're going to start coding for the milk first because it's going to be a bit easier and we're going to start off easy. So I'm going to click on my milk sprite and I'm going to start my code just the way I have before by going into the event blocks and grabbing that when green flag is clicked block. Next, I'm going to go into my motion blocks and grab my code to set the starting position. So it's going to say go to X 105, Y -64. After this, I'm going to code for what I want the milk carton to do. So I want to pick up the milk carton from the side of the door, pour it into my bowl, and then put it back. So how I'm going to start doing that is, first I'm going to move my milk carton over the bowl, and I'm going to code for this movement using a glide block. So I'm going to go back into my motions, grab my glide 1 second to new position block, and it's going to glide to the new position of x is 5 and y is negative 28. Next, I want to pour my milk. So I'm going to have to do this by tilting the milk so it can pour into the bowl. So how I do this is that I go to my Sprite area and I click on the direction property. So it gives me this direction wheel. And this wheel, I'm able to take this arrow and tilt my preview at any angle that I want. So I'm going to tilt it at maybe around 45 degrees. And I'm going to code for this tilt by going into my motion blocks, grabbing that point in direction block, and changing the 90 to 45 like we did in our preview, and then adding that to my blocks. But now when I click on this green flag, you'll notice that at the very beginning of my animation, it's still tilted at that 45-degree angle, and that's because I didn't code for it to start at the upright 90 direction. So I'm going to do that by going into my blocks, grabbing that point in 90 direction, and I'm going to add that to the very top of my code so that it starts at 90 in that one position. Next, I'm going to pour my milk. So I've taken a look already in the costumes tab up here, and there is no costume of the milk being poured, though there are costumes that are very cute for the milk with little arms and legs. So what I'm going to do instead of changing the costume to pour the milk is I'm going to add a sound to imitate the action of pouring the milk. And the sound that comes with this milk carton is this sound right here. It's called a glug sound. And so I'm going to use this sound to pour my milk. So I'm going to go back into my code, go into the sound blocks, and I'm going to play sound glug until done, so that when it is tilted at the 45-degree angle, it'll make that glug sound, and then after that, I want the milk to be turned back upright, and I want to put it back at its starting position at the door. So how I do that is I would go back to my motion blocks. I'm going to grab that point in direction 90 block again to turn it back upright after I poured my milk. And then I'm going to take a glide block to glide it back to our starting position. But because I have to change the X and Y here to our starting position. So I'm going to have to glide 1 second to the starting position of X is 105 and Y is negative 64. So when I test out my animation, it will look like this. And that's perfect. But I did mention that we wanted to add a bit of interactive elements into this animation. So what if I wanted to make it so that when I click on this carton again, it will do the same thing and pour my milk again, just in case I didn't pour enough the first time? Well, I would have to repeat all of this code right over here for when the sprite is clicked. And actually, if we go into the event blocks, you'll find that there is an event block called when the sprite clicked that we're going to drag into the coding area. So I could put this in both spots by right-clicking and duplicating this whole chunk of blocks, but because we're learning about a way where we can repeat code at any time in our animation, we're actually going to use a function to do this. So to make a function, you'll have to go into the My Blocks area in your code. So along the left, you're going to click on the red or pink My Blocks area. And we've never used this before because you can see that it is currently empty. So this is the area for all of the functions you've created. And so far you haven't created any functions. So let's get started on making one right now. Click on the Make a Block button. You'll get this pop-up to make your block, and you can name your block. And usually this is named after what specific task you want it to do. So right now this block you want to use to pour milk. So I'm going to name this block Pour Milk. I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that a little block or a big block that is red or pink has popped up into your coding area, and it says define pour milk. And this is used to define what you want this pour milk function to do. And in this case, we want to pour the milk by doing all of these things over here. So I'm going to put it underneath my define pour milk block. Next, you'll see that along the left-hand side, we now have a new block that we just made that says pour milk on it. And this I would drag into my coding area, and I would use in any spot that I wanted to use all of my pour milk code over here. So in this case, I want to pour milk when the green flag is clicked, and I also want to pour milk when the Sprite is clicked again. So if I push on the green flag, it will still pour my milk like before, and also if I click on the Sprite itself, it will also pour the milk. And that is our first function to pour our milk. And you can see how it's a bit repetitive to use this code 2 times in the same Sprite. So using a function might make it easier to see or even organize your code. Next, we're going to work on our egg Sprite. So we're going to click on the egg, and we're going to start coding for this egg. But you'll also notice that this egg, because it is white and the background is white, it's a little bit hard to see. So I'm going to go into the costumes, and I'm going to edit this egg to be a different color. And I'm a big fan of Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, so I'm going to make this egg green. I'm going to change the color like so. Alright, so I'm going to go back into my code now and code for my green egg. Let's get started by adding our event block for when the green flag is clicked, and our motion block to go to our starting position at x negative 190 and y 64. After, I want to animate this egg by taking the egg, cracking it on the side of the bowl 2 or 3 times, and then emptying all of my egg contents into the bowl. So how do I do this? First, I'll have to drag my egg to the side of the bowl where I want it to go, and I want it to glide here. So I'm going to glide 1 second to this new position at x negative 104, y negative 101. Next, I'm going to tilt my egg a little bit so I can crack it a bit better along the side of the bowl. And I did that for my milk as well, so I'm going to use that direction wheel again. And I'm going to see what angle I want it to be at. So I want it to be in direction 120. So I'm going to go into my motion blocks, grab that point in direction block, and change it to 120. And we have to remember also that we want it to start with the egg upright. So I'm going to make sure to put that point in direction 90, the upright position, at the very beginning of my code as well. So right now when I run my code, this is what the egg will do. So the egg so far will come from the very top, go at an angle, and crack on the side of the bowl. And we want it to crack so it bounces back 1 time and then 2 times. So I'm going to move it to bounce back to over here and glide to this new position at negative 123 and y negative 75. And then I want it to go back to the edge of the bowl. So I want to repeat this code maybe around 2 or 3 times. So instead of having to copy this code over and over again, we actually learned last week about using loops to do the exact same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a loop. We're going to go into our control blocks, and I'm going to find a loop that I can use to repeat my code. And since we want to repeat it 2 or 3 times, I'm going to use this repeat block right over here, put all of the code I want to repeat inside of that C, and since I only want to repeat it 2 times and not 10, I'm going to change that in the block and add that to our code. When I push this green flag button to preview my code, you'll see that the egg is cracking on the side of the bowl 2 times now. I'm also going to want to add a sound effect, just like for my milk. So I'm going to go into the Sounds tab at the very top, and the default sound that comes with the egg is a popping sound, like so. That isn't bad for cracking an egg on the side of the bowl, but I'm going to want to see what else I can find. So I'm going to choose a sound on the bottom left here. I'm going to go into the effects category. And the best one I could find to imitate an egg cracking on the side of a bowl is going to be this finger snap. It sounds like this. And I'm going to put this into my code. So I'm going to go back to my code, go into the sound blocks, and I'm going to take this start sound finger snap and put it into my coding area. So when do I want the sound to happen? I want it to happen when I hit the side of my bowl. So that is when it first glides to the side of the bowl in the loop that we just made. So I'm going to put it right underneath that glide block. So when I test out my my code with the green flag, so I think that looks pretty good. So that the milk carton glugs at the same time that the egg comes in and cracks. But it does look a bit busy since they're both happening at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delay the egg cracking until after the milk has been poured. So the milk takes around 3 seconds or maybe 2 seconds to pour into the bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my control blocks, and I'm going to grab the wait 1 second block, and instead of 1 second, I'm going to wait maybe around 3 seconds until after my milk has been poured to start my animation. So I'm going to put this block right underneath the starting position blocks. Now when I test out my new code, you'll see that the milk pours first and then the egg will run its code after 3 seconds. Alright, so continuing on with our animation, we're going to have the egg now crack open. So we're going to have it break a little bit, and then we're going to pour it into the bowl. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have to change the costumes, change the look of the egg. Along the top in the Costumes tab, you'll see that there are a few costumes for the egg, and this one would work perfectly for cracking open our egg. And I'm also going to make sure to change this to a green egg as well to match our initial egg. And I'm going to go back to our code, and I'm going to go into the look block. And I'm going to take the switch costume block into our coding area, and instead of egg F, I'm going to change the costume to egg B for our broken egg and put that at the end of our code. Also, because we haven't set the beginning costume for our egg yet, it's going to be at this broken egg the whole time. So I'm going to have to grab the switch costume block again and set it so that egg A, our unbroken egg, is what the animation starts off at the very beginning. So I'm going to put it at the very beginning with our starting setup code. So far, our animation looks like this. So right now we have cracked open our egg along the side of the bowl, and now we need to bring it on top of the bowl and drop all of our contents in. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to drag our egg above the bowl, and I'm going to go into our motion blocks and code for that by gliding to this new position at x negative 66, y negative 48, and I'm going to flip it upside down. So how I do that is I will go into my direction wheel over here, and I'm going to see what direction I need to put it at to be upside down. And in this case, it's negative 90. So I'm going to grab my point in direction block, put it at the end of my code, and change the direction to negative 90 so that it's pouring upside down. After this whole animation has happened, I want the egg to go back to the original position, and I want it to be the unbroken egg, so I sort of reset my my whole scenario here. So how I do that is first I'm going to go into my control blocks, and I'm going to wait 1 second before I make the whole egg disappear and reappear at the top of the shelf, because I want to see this costume change for 1 second before I make it disappear. Next, I'm going to add my disappearing code. So I'm going to go into my looks blocks, and I'm going to hide my egg. So now the whole animation looks like this. and I want it to reappear at the very top of the shelf, reset in the initial position that it was put in. So in the beginning, we used these 3 pieces of code to set our egg position. So what I need to do is I need to duplicate this code and then put it again at the end of my code to reset the position. So I'm going to put this positioning code, our code to crack our egg, and lastly our code to reset the position of the egg. And because I used a hide block, I'm going to want to use a show block to make sure that it shows up again the next time we run this animation. So I'm going to put it just at the very end. So you heard me say that I'm repeating certain blocks. So I'm repeating the 3 blocks here necessary to reset my egg. So in theory, I'm able to use a function to reset my egg using these 3 blocks of code. But we're not going to be doing that today. We're going to be doing a function to crack our egg. But if you want to make a function to reset your egg, please do, and I'd love to see how you manage to do that. So I just mentioned that we want to make a function to crack our egg, and that's because I want to, at the very end of my animation, I want to be able to see my egg at the very top over here, and I want to click on it to crack it one more time. So how I would do that is just like with my milk, I'm going to add the event of when this sprite is clicked, and I'm going to want to repeat all of my blocks used to crack my egg, which is all of these blocks right over here. And just like with my milk, I'm going to do this using a function. So in the My Blocks area on the left-hand side, you'll see that it is empty and our pour milk function didn't transfer over into our egg sprite, and that's because it's not transferable between sprites for the functions, but I can make my own block for the eggs. So I'm going to click on the Make a Block. I'm going to call this function crack egg, and you'll see that we have the define crack egg block here. So I'm going to define this function with all of this code used to crack our egg and then reset it at the very top. And I'm going to move it over here so we can see the rest of our code properly. And I'm going to take the crack egg block that we just made in our left-hand side, and I'm going to put it where I want the egg to crack. So I want the egg to crack once I click on the green flag, and also when I click on this sprite after the egg resets. So now my animation looks like this. So everything works just like before, but now when I click on the egg, it will crack again, or if I click on the milk, you can add a bit more milk to your recipe. Alright, next is our last step. So we've added all of our ingredients, and now we want to cook and make our scrambled eggs. So how I want to do that is I want you to be able to click on this bowl in order to cook your recipe. So what I need to do is I need to go to my bowl sprite, and I need to code for when the sprite is clicked. So when the sprite is clicked, I want it to switch to another backdrop, and the backdrop is going to be a picture of my scrambled eggs. So first I'm going to have to add that picture of scrambled eggs. So along the stage area, I'm going to get that backdrop menu, but this time instead of choosing a backdrop, I'm going to upload my own backdrop. And that's going to be my photo that I found on the internet of scrambled eggs. So I'm going to upload from my computer a picture of scrambled eggs, and in this case, because my eggs were green, I'm going to have green scrambled eggs as well. So here's a very appetizing picture of our green scrambled eggs. So you'll see here that in our preview window, we have the green eggs now as a background, and also all of our ingredients are still laid out alongside of it. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that our first backdrop that we start with when the green flag is clicked is going to be our refrigerator backdrop, because we started all of our animations based on that backdrop. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually code for the backdrop. So I'm going to go back into my code, and you'll see now that since I have my stage area selected along the right here, that I can actually code for my backdrop itself. So when this green flag is clicked for the backdrop, it's going to change to the refrigerator backdrop. And that code is going to be in the looks blocks, and you're going to be able to switch backdrop to refrigerator. And so that's how we set it up so that when we click on this green flag, instead of the green eggs, which we just put up, it's going to start always with the refrigerator backdrop. We're going to go back to our bowl sprite and set it so that when this bowl is clicked, it will move on to that next backdrop that we just set up, that green scrambled eggs backdrop. So when the sprite is clicked, we'll go to our look blocks again, and we're going to switch backdrop this time to that green eggs backdrop. So now when I click on this green flag and all of the animations happen, and I want to click on this bowl to finish my baking or cooking, it will turn to this green eggs backdrop right here. But you'll see that I don't want these ingredients in the bowl to be there when I switch to my green eggs backdrop. So how do I code so that these things all disappear when the backdrop changes? Well, if you actually look into the event blocks a little bit deeper, there's also this block that says when backdrop switches to. So in this case, when the backdrop switches to this green egg block, we want this to disappear. So we're going to go into the looks block and we're going to hide. But also, like I mentioned before, if you're hiding something, you always want to make sure that you're putting in a show block as well. So where's the show block going to go? We want it to show when the green flag is clicked. So I'm going to go back into my event blocks and grab the when green flag is clicked, so that when the green flag is clicked, it will show, but when the backdrop switches to the green eggs, it will hide. And we're going to want to put these blocks in all of our sprites for the milk and also for the eggs. So the easiest way to do this is actually to grab our code that we want, drag it over our sprites, and it should copy a version into our sprites code. So I'm going to do this with both these pieces of code. So in my egg code now, it's a bit messy, but you can rearrange it. When the backdrop changes to green eggs, we hide, and when the backdrop or when the green flag is clicked, we show. And similarly in the milk blocks or in the milk code, we also dragged these code pieces into the code here. Obviously, since you already have a when green flag is clicked area here, you're always free to put the show in this code as well and not have an extra piece of code here. And for the egg too, like that. So now when I run my full animation, I have all of my recipes being added into my bowl. And maybe I'm feeling a bit hungry today, so I'm going to add an extra egg by clicking on that because I can do that now. And then I'm going to cook my scrambled eggs by clicking on the bowl. And you'll see my scrambled eggs turned out very nicely, and none of my ingredients or my bowl are in the photo or the frame anymore. So that is our animation for today, and I'm really craving some scrambled eggs now. So if you want to make your own animation of your favorite breakfast food and how to make it, I would love to see that in the comments below. Make sure to share your Scratch project. Next, we're going to be moving on to our animated Scratch or our advanced Scratch lesson. So for our advanced Scratch lesson, I'm going to go into my profile and we can see that there is a Scratch Lesson 3.5 available, and that is going to be our advanced lesson for today. And in our advanced lesson, we're going to be learning how to bake a cake. And this requires a few extra ingredients that I added into the animation. So here is our Scratch animation. I'm going to click on the green flag to run the animation. And you'll notice that I added a few things in order to make this work. So for the advanced lesson, I, number one, added ingredients in the following order: butter, sugar, eggs, milk, and then flour. Number two, I created sprites in Scratch for the butter, sugar, and flour since they were not available through our Scratch library. Third, I changed the stage when the bowl is clicked to a party backdrop. Number four, I added a birthday cake sprite playing Happy Birthday when the backdrop switches to the party backdrop. Number five, I hid all of the other sprites when the backdrop switches to this new party backdrop. And number six, I showed all the sprites except the birthday cake when the green flag is clicked. And you'll also notice that at the very end of my animation, I blew out the candles of the birthday cake. And just like in our first animation, I was able to click on any of the ingredients one more time if I wanted to add any more of a certain ingredient, and I had to click on the bowl in order to go on to my next backdrop, just like what I did with the green eggs in the previous lesson, or in the main lesson. So I hope you enjoyed our lesson for today, and hope you try out our advanced lesson as well if you're feeling more confident with all of the functions that we learned. And I will see you all next week.